How can we best manage relationships with service providers?
I think for me, it's about expectation setting. And that goes on with that collaboration piece. There's a lot, when a service is procured and purchased, but at that point what people don't realise is the investment that's needed on both sides to make sure that the expectations of the client's business can be met. So things like mobilising, time and time again we see short mobilisation periods where we expect significant change. That's not going to happen, it's not realistic. You're seeing expectations with the client's organisation that aren't backed up by the supplier. One of the points that I went back to is selling services and facilities is something that the mantra of the business has to be highlighted by the salespeople, those BD people that are sat in front of those clients in the first instance. And it often gets lost in translation. In my business, we don't have salespeople. We have operators who sell, and that's because they carry on that journey. So you don't get someone at the front end selling something that can't be delivered. You don't get the mantra of the business that gets dropped the minute the sale's been made, which often then leads to the breakdown. You've got someone who's standing there who's going to deliver. So people underrate mobilisation. And they also underrate, I'm going to say it again, informal communication, the ability to build a relationship and have that security, the back patch that when things, everything is not going to go all right if you transition a £5 or £6 million FM company. It's not going to be hunky-dory the whole way through. You're going to have challenges. You need an avenue where you can have open discussions about how you solve that. You need honest relationships about what the provider's business is doing and what the client's business is doing and whether there's synergy there.
Yeah, I'm probably really most inexperienced there because, as I said, I'm client, and for 20 years we've really done a lot ourselves internally. Most people are employed by fostering partners. We don't have a large service provider. We have very small people who have been with us for 20, 30 years, two-man bands, etc. We trust them massively, but it's back to your point of reference you made, Brian. Actually, it causes me a problem at the moment. The business is fast growing. It's before every service provider starts running their cars. We've had these brilliant, brilliant service providers, 2 or 3 man bands. They literally just work for the fostering partners. They look after all of our HVAC. But we've grown massively in the last 12, 18 months, acquiring new buildings, 400 new staff. And we're creaking, and as much as you've had these amazing relationships and partnerships with trusted people, actually it's time for us to consider our future. So learning from Claire, learning from Brian, etc. about your pitfalls has been interesting to hear. But yeah, I find myself in slightly a different position, but I do think we probably need to start making these sort of large
lines, isn't it, between?
Well, it is. It's the business needs, absolutely, and things change very quickly, and it kind of, I wouldn't say shocked, but things happen in a business that you don't necessarily have insight to. We had a merger or a partnership, and it changed the face of our business enormously, very, very quickly, from the expectation of rapid growth, the acquisition of more space. Happened in such a short space of time. I'm literally on the back foot at the moment with some really great partners, but actually can't help support me in the entirety of the estate. And the speed that happened has caught us a little off guard.
I think just going back to the original question as well, which was we've kind of mobilised and we've got into this relationship and things are ticking along good, bad or indifferent at that point. It goes back to my point. Do what you said you'd do. If you've agreed to do something, do it. Do the basics properly and report what you said you'd report. All too often I go into work with clients globally, big clients that are being serviced by large FM providers and some small as well, who are not doing what they said they would do. That then leads to 2 things. That leads to a mistrust between the client and the service provider. And then we get into that awful situation that I experienced many years ago in the life of PFIs, when the client started employing more people to watch the service provider because they didn't trust and that is still going on today with contracts, nothing to do with PFIs. And how many times have I heard clients say, Brian, we hired X, we're not really happy, so what I've done, Brian, is I've hired another 3 FMs to watch their ops man. utter madness. They were wanting economies of scale in the first place, but because the FM market and some of the FM providers, not all, through their own fault or through a lack of trust or through a lack of communication between them and the client at bid stage or preferred bidder stage, you've got yourself into a situation that no one can get out of for 3, 4 or 5 years. And if you want to get out of it, it becomes a rather costly thing to do. So report, going back to the presentation that was just on, it's not difficult to report stats every week. Everything revolves around some form of stats in our world, doesn't it? We all rely on them to tell us something. But there's a mistrust out there. There's a mistrust because some of the clients won't share their systems and tell Lynn to stop ringing you. There's a mistrust. There's a mistrust between the client and the service provider. They don't want them to link into their own systems half the time. The service providers are then in a position, an enviable position sometimes, where they can report whatever they want. I've just been working with a client who their service provider is using BI as a reporting method. It never works. It doesn't work. It's the only method the client's got to see it. So there's an immediate mistrust there. So you're never building that collaborative relationship all the time throughout it. And the same applies in this world.
Do you know what the funny thing is there? The majority of clients that I've worked with and have really successful relationships with, they totally expect me to come and say, I can't properly, we can't do this. And the need for me as a supplier to be the first person to tell my client about the issue is often more important than the issue itself, because trust is so fundamentally important. It's the same with my 18-year-old daughter. She burnt the countertop the other day. I actually said thank you very much to her when she told me about it. I didn't drive home later and find the countertop was burnt. It's the same process. Maintaining your trust is often more important than the fact that you've got a bit of an issue. And that's the thing, it's the reason we just mobilised 400 nurseries, and the client was almost laughed at me when I said I want to present to nurseries. I want to tell them about the turbulence they're just about to undertake by having services provided through us. And he said, why do you want to do that? I said, because they need to know on day one that we are not going to turn up on force and solve every single problem that they've had over the past 3 years while you've been going through transition. They need to know it's going to take time. They need their expectations set. They need to listen to me, look into my eyes, as someone in my business who understands my ethos, and say, this is where we're going, guys, this is what we're going to go through, and this is how long it's going to take. And I shall keep updating you when things change. And that's the only way. It's the only way to make sure that that honesty builds that trust. It's not about the problems. We're all going to have problems, lots of them, doozies.